This portion of the workshop is just focusing again on the evangelistic aspect. So Father has presenting on discerning the Lord's voice in your prayer. This section kind of draws that together with evangelization, because if you think about it, if you're spending all this time in prayer, the Lord is filling you, but he doesn't give it to you just for you. There's going to be this natural overflow. There's going to be this outpouring. And it's not going to be confusing. It's not going to be like, well, I don't know where I'm called or who I am to give this to. You're probably already doing it. You've just not named it. That's what you're doing. So when we think of evangelization, I think a lot of times we think of street corner preachers or people who are always maybe the loudest or the most aggressive in their evangelization. But each one of us is uniquely called and gifted. I'm not called to evangelize in the same ways that Father does. I'm not called to evangelize in the same way my kids do. We have different friends. We have different circles. The Lord isn't going to ask us to do something that he hasn't put a special way on our hearts or a special way in our lives where we are already living. So just keeping in mind that if you think of evangelization of like, well, I'm not doing that because I'm not leading a small group. I'm not even in a small group. Or nobody I invite to anything ever says yes. That doesn't mean you're not doing it. It just means you're hungry for it. It means that you want to do it, even if it doesn't feel like it's working. You're learning. So it's just finding out what I am uniquely called to do. I always like to know the whys. I always like to know, why am I doing this, or the behind the scenes. That may not be for you, so you can tune out on this part. But our Archdiocese has given some little clarifications on why are we doing this? We're not Baptists. We're not going out there, we're not evangelicals. So why are we evangelizing? We're Catholics, right? Catholics don't do that. You show up, you go to Mass, that's it. Well, if you think about Vatican II, whether you know anything about it or not, it marks a shift in the way the church approaches the modern world. It didn't mean that we just did the Mass differently and out was the Latin and in was the English or wherever you're going. That might be what we kind of consider Vatican II, but actually there was a couple key themes, and one was the universal call to holiness, meaning holiness isn't just for priests and sisters and religious or consecrated men and women. Holiness is for everyone. Everyone is called to holiness. And a universal call to mission, being on mission, seeking out others. And so just keeping that in mind, that, how am I called to holiness? How is the person in front of me called to holiness? How am I called to mission? What does that even look like in my life? St. John Paul II coined a phrase called the new evangelization. And that is recognizing evangelization as the church's primary mission and deepest identity. If you take a moment and you think about what's the role of the church, what's the role of the Catholic Church, what's the role of our church that I go to every Sunday? Is its primary mission and its deepest identity sink into your core to evangelize, to go and seek, to spread the gospel? And if it is, how are we doing? Like, what's our temperature on that? Without shame or blame, just curiosity. How are we doing on that? And here's just some ways that the church has produced statements that affirm this. So the vocation of the church. Evangelizing is in fact the grace and vocation proper to the church, her deepest identity. And this part just really gets me. She exists in order to evangelize. Just thinking about that. Not she exists to save me and to bring me to communion and bring me, she exists in order to evangelize. From Pope Paul VI in Evangelize, is that how I say it? Nuntiad. There's two I's at the end. or in English, Evangelization in the Modern World. And this was written in 1975. Pope Francis refers to this document as the greatest pastoral document written to date. And he has directed reading of it and rereading of it among bishops and cardinals to return to this as our deepest identity. And just to reiterate what Father Vogel shared, what Jesus shared, go, therefore, and make disciples. Jesus also commands it. It's not just the church that's commanding it. So we have this identity that I feel like we're not really even tapping into. And we may think of it looking differently when we think of evangelization than what it actually looks like and what it is we're already doing. We might get our should in the way. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, instead of what am I already doing? John Paul II said in Redemptoris Missio, which is the mission of the Redeemer, I sense that the moment has come to commit all of the church's energies to a new evangelization. No believer in Christ, no institution of the church can avoid this supreme duty to proclaim Christ to all peoples. So this encyclical, it's directed to 3 different areas: to people who do not yet believe in Christ, to re-evangelizing and rekindling the Christian faith, and then for pastoral care, the deeper insertion of the gospel into the hearts and minds of Christians. So it's like recovering our identity, bringing it back. It's a really big paradigm shift. And our archdiocese wants all of us to know that, have you heard remind me of our motto, one church, encountering Jesus, equipping disciples, living mercy. They are aiming this at every soul in our archdiocese, not just Catholic souls. So how are we doing aiming at every soul? And what does that look like in my life? That there's people on all different spheres of temperature, and we're called to reach out to them. Regardless of where they land on we're still equally called to serve someone who is not in the Catholic Church and someone who isn't. Someone who is a Christian and someone who, we're partners, and we can all reach out together. So this is just affirmation of vocation of the laity. So the universal call to holiness. Laity meaning people who aren't priests, sisters, and brothers. That those of us who live in the world, we have a special calling. It's a unique calling. Think how many people there are in this room versus priests. Like, there's a lot more of us than fathers in this room. Look at all that we can do. And look at all the places we go that he doesn't. He cares for so many people, but yet think about how many people we in turn touch. I think of your salt. Like when you sprinkle salt, it's so tiny. And we're out there sprinkling and touching in tiny, tiny ways. They don't have to be huge ways. We aren't each speaking in front of 7 congregations, but we collectively are really large. So this is the unexploded bomb of Vatican II. And I'm not going to read all of Lumen Gentium, although I really want to, but I want you to have time to process. But there's some beautiful things here, just believe me. But basically, if I'm summing it up, it's saying you live in the world, you're called to do things in the world. You're not called to serve like Father does. You're called to serve in a secular way. I think of my husband taking people ice fishing. He's not even talking about Jesus. In fact, that would probably kill him. Like, it would not kill him, but, you know, it would hurt badly. He's not at that place. But he's still living mercy. He is being kindness to someone who's like, this guy said to him recently, you know, will you take me and my son fishing? And it's his adult son. And he said, sure, but you can just use my stuff. You can go on your, he said, oh no, you're just so much better. There's a reason he wants to be with him. I bet it's not just about fishing. I bet it's also about the way that he is as a father. I bet it's the way that I get teary-eyed, he exhibits something holy and sacred, even if he doesn't know it. And so, like, what are those ways that you draw others to you, even though you don't even think that you're sharing Jesus? We can build upon those. Those are tiny steps. That's the unexploded bomb. It reaches to others. And maybe someday after he's naturally built this friendship, the guy might say, hey, your wife does a lot of churchy things. You know, what is that all about? There's already been a trust there built.